Now I see it. Do, 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 do. Dun, 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 dun. Dun, 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 dun. Amazing intro music. Intro. That was the extent of my budget for the amazing intro. Are we still going? I think it is. And do we have sound? Apologies if you get a little bit of feedback, but just so I can check the sound. Yeah, I can hear myself loud and clear. Maybe a bit too loud. I don't think I can adjust the microphone on this at the moment, so I'll try not to shout too much. Turn your speakers down a bit, or lower your headphone volume for a bit, just in case. Silly intro aside, now it's done, I might actually record that at some point and just use that as an intro. Maybe even come up with some silly music to go with it without actually using any instruments. I'll just sing it and hum it and scat music it, scat vocals, intro. Right, first things first, I think I should do caveat. Sorry, I'll catch up with what's been typed in the chat in a minute. And I may very well end up saying lots of caveats like I often do. And that's something I sort of want to talk about at some point as we go along, to do with other topics, but it links into the inevitable need to caveat so much when you're doing stuff on this public medium. But yeah, first caveat to get people past the initial situation of the Hangout of, yes, it's just me at the moment. So even though I'm utilizing the Hangout system to enable me to broadcast live, and I may send out invites to bring other people into it either later on, or even doing it as a separate show, another show or whatever next time, something like that. But it's going to be me to start off with, and it's going to be me just mainly talking about various stuff. I may very well ramble and waffle a fair bit. I'll probably go all over loads of different topics. I might stick to one topic. I might go over loads of stuff. Not formatting it to any great degree. I'm not restricting myself to any defined format or schedule or script. I'm just going to do it. That's why I called this title on this first one Just, because that can be added to so many other words, such as just me, just talking, just about, just everything. And I could go further into that. We're talking about just as part of other words like justice. Justice, the highest of all virtues, according to Plato, I think it was, either Plato or Aristotle. Plato, I think, as far as I remember. Of all the virtues, justice is the highest. And what does justice represent? What does justice mean in definition? I'm trying to get tobacco into a skin at the moment and roll it up so I can set fire to it and inhale it. So again, this is no major production value formatting, CGI or music or whatever. No, it's just me talking at you lot. I can see the chat room. I will try and keep up with the chat and read some of the comments and whatever. I will try, but when I get off on a topic, I might not notice what you're typing in, so please don't think I'm ignoring you. I'm just off in my own little rambling. But yes, justice. And I suppose really in this, as this has developed over the past few months, as it sort of bubbled away in the back of my mind, and I've been planning on starting up doing another show at some point. This is not to, this is partly why I did it today, this evening, on the Sunday evening, because I don't want to interfere with what other people are doing, or that I've been involved with as well, like the Wednesday night chats and the Friday night chats, stuff like that. I'm not trying to compete or to create a conflict, a schedule, a timing conflict between different things. So I have been planning on doing another show for quite a while, and as this has developed and bubbled up away in the back of my mind, the title, the name, has gradually developed over a period of time, and I will get further into explaining that. And it is very deliberate. It's not random, and it's not necessarily just to reference anything to do with the Arthurian legends. There's a whole lot more to it than that. In the one sort of little podcast interview chat thing I did with Jeff C, I titled that one Excaliber, because the idea had already started developing for me then, and I did explain a little bit about why I titled it in that way, and that's related into this title. It's just extended a bit further now, become a bit fuller and a bit more balanced. And yes, justice. What does justice mean? It means balance. That's what justice represents: balance, equilibrium. The definition of justice is equilibrium. That doesn't necessarily mean an eye for an eye. It means a natural law, cause and effect, return, a balancing of energy. And that's a lot of what is, I feel, going on at the moment in this environment, in this melee of propaganda, this psychological melee of propaganda. The information war, as some have called it. I think it goes far beyond that. It's just a modern sort of contemporary nomenclature. Yes, I probably will use a lot of multiple syllable words. If you have difficulty with them, then that's up to you. If you find it annoying, go and listen to somebody else, go and watch somebody else. Yeah, I did sort of start caveated myself at the beginning, didn't I? Yeah, if you're not into listening to some bearded guy rambling about loads of various stuff, go and find yourself something more useful or more entertaining to do, because I will be doing that. I'll be doing quite a lot of that. And as I said about not formatting and scripting this, it's just going to be me talking. So I'm not sticking to some kind of schedule of how long I spend on any particular topic or what I do or don't say about it. I'm just going to talk about stuff. And if people have difficulty, if people are triggered by certain things, or if people are worried by certain things, or even if it makes you feel like, oh my God, that's so ridiculous, he's talking such bunkum, well, that's up to you what you think about it. I'm going to just talk about it. If you don't like it, carry on. If you want to disagree, carry on. That should be using that dreaded word should, without trying to turn it into a verbal leverage of force. That should be what this environment allows us to do. If you've listened to me talking before on some of the hangouts and other group chat kind of things, I've often talked about this kind of stuff. In this environment, there's a hell of a lot of effort by not only what I would, to use a simplistic generalizing label, the establishment, the status quo, attempt to push into this environment to divide and conquer, as all that kind of cliched stuff of creating conflict where there doesn't need to be any, fueling people's stereotypes and their jingoism and their xenophobia and their biases and their personal fears, such that then they cannot actually discuss about things. They can't talk about things. They just resort to conflicting, even if it's just verbal conflict, but it is a conflict. They expect a winner and a loser. For them, the process, the principle of the communication is lost. It's all about just survivor and victim. Those who will be eaten and those who are doing the eating in a predatory fashion. And that suits the establishment quite nicely, thank you very much. But it's not just the establishment that does that kind of stuff. There's lots of other reasons why people would be doing that kind of thing, and it does go on, whether it's coming from agencies or establishment or whatever. It goes on anyway, because they don't want people to be able to have discussions where they, as George Carlin nicely put it, they figure out that they're getting fucked up the ass and they want to do something to stop it or to change the situation or to avoid getting fucked up the ass. So keeping people arguing and in conflict with each other is what they prefer. Yeah, it's something. I think, Gary, you asked right near the top of the chat. I seem to remember seeing when I was starting up, what's the topic? That's one of the main topics, right? As I've often talked about. And I think for myself, maybe it becomes one of those regular topics because of the fact that I see it and I observe it and I'm subject to it as well myself quite often, and have been in this environment for a number of years now. So I think it's one of those things that, it's like if you live somewhere near a river, then you'll probably, talk about the river fairly often, if that makes sense. If things are in your environment, you tend to reference them more often than if they're not in your environment. Maybe that's just a presumption on my part without any actual study, without any studying of the statistics to find out. But yes, so let me get back to explaining the title, because some of that I think is highly relevant to that topic of imbalance, people being unbalanced by the system, and how the system likes to come along and disrupt your balance such that it generates argumentation. Because when people are unbalanced, they tend to conflict more readily because they become further and further polarized. They become further and further extremes of other people that they try to interact with. They're further and further apart. So when they come together and try to interact, they're at polar opposites and they just begin conflicting. So why the Sol Excaliber? I got into explaining the Excaliber before in the other video I did. This is not necessarily just referencing stuff to do with the Arthurian legends and the legend of the sword and the lady in the lake and King Arthur gallivanting around the world, rescuing maidens and looking for the chalice, the Holy Grail. That was the words I was trying to remember. And using Excaliber, his fantastic weapon, which was the ultimate in swords. No other sword could best it. As long as he was wielding Excaliber, nobody could beat him because it was the greatest sword ever. And that is in and of itself a misdirection, a very deliberate romanticizing, simplifying, and thereby misdirecting people, the readers, the viewers, from what I think It's the original intention and meaning behind that concept. It's nothing to do with a sword. It's not a sword. It's not a lump of metal sharpened to use as a weapon against other people who've also got swords. Maybe even not, you never know. Yeah. Some of those knights were not all chivalrous and lovely like the romantic ideals try to portray them. But anyway, yeah, it's a misdirection. Excaliber, in its definition, simply describes something that is beyond classification, beyond compare to anything else of similar type. So if you were talking about a sword, it's the equivalent of saying, as I said, it's the ultimate sword ever. No other sword can compare to it. If you look through the etymology of caliber and calib and where it comes from, it was a word that referenced a measurement, basically, is the simplest way to describe it. It was a measurement that was considered high quality. If something had caliber or was of caliber, it meant it was of high quality, it was fine, it was precision. Yeah? So something that was Excaliber was beyond the level of being defined in that way. It was the ultimate of, it was the Übermensch, it was the Superman of swords, if you're referencing it as a sword. And that enables the misdirection, because it makes it much simpler in a similar way to a lot of astrotheological anthropomorphization of concepts to do with the movements of major bodies in space, because that's really what astrotheology is, and in reference to trying to describe how your solar system, your universe, your reality operates, and the cycles and the patterns that are within that environment, to people that had no concepts of astrology, astronomy, geography, geometry, mathematics, equations, loads and loads of bits that nowadays in a contemporary sense would just label as science, mostly. Yeah, most of those topics anyway. So in the same manner, a lot of these old myths and legends and things like the legends, the myths, the Arthurian legends are not necessarily to do with what they are literally written about. So it may reference a character who goes around and does this, that, and the other in the storylines, rescues maidens, finds the Holy Grail, blah, blah, blah. But it shouldn't be taken as a literary description of a human being going around performing those acts in the world, in the physical world. Often these mythologies, these legends that come down to us from the past, or are even created in more recent past, because the Arthurian legends aren't necessarily that old. I think they're based on older stuff, but as they're generally portrayed, certainly in British culture and around the world anyway now, with things like the blooming stupid Hollywood style Camelot movies and stuff like that. This is, you know, how it's simplified and portrayed as if it is the legend of some guy who called King Arthur, who had a super powerful sword that was so good that nobody could beat him. So he went around unifying the kingdom using the power of his mighty sword to compel all the other knights to obey him by beating them in a duel and therefore winning their loyalty. Excalibur is a much deeper meaning than that, I would argue. I'm sure academic students of English literature and French, I think, because the Arthurian legend spreads into France, and older than that as well. As people have dug into these mythologies, you know, there's a lot more ancient depth to the Arthurian legend than just being a medieval romantic poetry story, poetic story, a prose, whatever. Anyway, yeah, soul. So why did I stick the soul on it? Well, for one thing, it's Sunday, and as I was going along, I was thinking more and more that I should do this thing on a Sunday because it's the day of the sun. I used to do my regular show on a Thursday using the contemporary pronunciation on Thor's Day. That's Thors, yes, the Nordic god Thor. Thor's Day. That's where we get the name of that day from. Yeah, we're supposedly not adherents to the Nordic theological traditions. You know, we're not all worshippers of Odin, yet one of our, well, more than one of our days of the week is named after a Nordic god, Thor's Day. But the reason I did that back then was on the idea of the principle of that lightning spark that Thor commands. Because again, like astrotheology, the Nordic legends are not literary. They're not meant to be taken literally as a description. They are anthropomorphized astrotheological archetypes to represent concepts and functions of reality. So Thor was the wielder of the electric spark, the power to create or destroy life. And again, there's more to that. There's a whole lot more to that there. But this time I thought, I want to do it on Sunday. It seems appropriate to me to do it on the day of the sun, even though I could argue about how our days of the week, our calendar system, our Gregorian calendrical system is not accurate to the planet's seasonal cycle. And that could be taken further, talking about contemporary problems of the way the weather is at the moment and the way the seasons have been messed about and why that has happened and where it comes from and stuff like that. But the point is, yes, I could get into the ambiguousness and the conjecture about, well, why is this the day of the sun, supposedly, because these calendars are not accurate. So is this actually the day of the sun, or is it a completely different day? And then what calendar are you going to use? What calendar are you going to reference to talk about this stuff? You're going to use the Julian calendar or whatever. I list a whole load of different calendrical systems and cultural ways of defining the days of the week and the seasons of the months and blah, 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 blah. So it's Sunday. It's the day of the sun in contemporary general language here in the UK, in Great Britain. So Sol is the sun, is the name of our sun in this solar system. Yeah. There's various things you could say about why it's called soul and where that word comes from and its connections into many other words, such as if you add vowels to that, you know, you could get soul as in S-O-U-L. You can get soul as in S-O-L-E. So like the sole of your foot, or the fact that it is you solely. I'm here, soul. And the various ways and connotations that is woven in through the English language. Again, a topic I've often talked about before. The English language is not a natural development. It has been crafted and massaged and manipulated deliberately to weave into it certain patterns and threads that can be quite revealing when you start picking them apart. And often when people get into looking at the legal system, and you inevitably have to learn about legalese and stuff like that, you soon start to realize how the English language is so manipulated. And I'm tempted to say corrupted, but that's not really, I don't feel that's really accurate, because it's not necessarily corrupted, it's just been deliberately molded to be this way. I suppose you could argue that it was corrupted from the various dialects that were called Old English, and then there's all the others, sub-dialects and languages from around the geographical area that is now known as the UK, and the links back into other older languages and blah, blah, blah. On and on it goes through Babylon, the Tower of Babel. I did warn you I would ramble a lot, so yeah. Be warned, this is my opportunity to ramble and waffle and talk in whatever direction I want. So it may not always go in a straight line. But let me look at this and I'll finish what I was going to say about the title and why the title. So Sol. Sol is the usual name for our sun. S-O-N. S-U-N. Again, English language complexities and deliberate weaving of multiple meanings hidden one thread on top of another. The same word can have a different meaning dependent on the intonation, the pronunciation, and who you're saying it to and the environment you are using the language in. So if I was stood in a Christian church and I said son, most people hearing me say it would think I were referring to Jesus, the Son. But if I was stood in a planetarium and said sun, most of the people there would think, oh, he's referring to the thing up in the sky. So this is all done deliberately. And my use of the word soul was deliberate, not just because it's Sunday, but for other reasons. Soul, for most people, when I say soul, and I've asked a few people about this, they think of the sun. And then you get into the connotations like I've just described of, well, do you mean S-U-N or do you mean S-O-N? Soul. Do you mean soul? S-O-N, S-U-N, the soul that was sent back to us to reveal the light, to remind us of where the light comes from? That's just one theological point of view. You know, if you dig into the religions, if you do the kind of comparative religious studies and whatever, you see that it's not solely part of the Christian theology. It's woven into most of the other religions, if not all of them in one way or another. But it also, when I ask people, I say, well, does it make you think of the sun up in the sky? Oh, yeah, you know, that big ball, sun up in the sky. And it's, well, yeah, ball, circle. That's the feminine energy. And Excaliber, what does Excaliber make most people think of? As I described earlier, most people know it as a sword. That's a sword, straight line. Defining straight line. That's male energy. So the two together, male and female energy. And it's one of the oldest symbols, the circle with the line in it. And there's various sort of sub-versions and multiple versions of that where the line is moved or whatever, or the circle is split in half. That's something else I'll get into as well, because that reference is to do with the Arthurian legend as well. But that's why this idea, this title has been bubbling away in my head and building up to the point where I felt, yeah, okay, that is it. I've been overthinking it. And when I was talking with somebody last night and I asked them, what do you think about it? And he very rightly turned around and said to me, well, what does your gut tell you? And I thought, yes, mate, you're right. I should just listen. I should be just listening to my gut and go with that. So yes, my gut has been telling me that's what it should be. Because like I've done with other shows, I've tried to, and maybe subtly sometimes, maybe in an obtuse fashion, because that's what I do, imply, suggest, intimate concepts to do with balance and that male and female energy, and finding that balance, referencing that balance, tapping into the energy of both, not one or the other. And that gets me into one of the other sort of things I wanted to mention, talking about at the moment, because I will, this show, this concept, this idea, what I'm going to do with this is not necessarily going to be about world events, current events, news stories, things like that. Yes, I probably will talk about certain stuff. I probably will mention recent news events and running stories and stuff like that, but that's not really, it's not my intention, and that will come back up again as well in a minute. It's not my intention that this thing, this concept of this show is going to be another contemporary news show, so let's talk about the news. And it's, no, I'll reference some things, but I think there is more than enough, for myself anyway, I feel that there is already more than enough out there that if people want to find out information about current events and news stories, if they want to keep abreast of what's happened now, what's the latest breaking news, what do people think about what the news event is, breaking it down, pulling apart the propaganda, that kind of stuff is there, and it's going well, I feel, even though a lot of the other talking heads out there will often bemoan about how the alternative media is being beaten down. It's beaten down. It's not. Yeah? The reality of it is certain topics are either deliberately quelled or suppressed in one way or another, similar to what I was talking about earlier, of how they will try to distract or divide people that are converging on certain concepts or information. But in general, whenever it's like whack-a-mole. Whenever they get rid of one outlet, more outlets will pop up somewhere else, because people want to do this kind of stuff. And I would argue that there is a societal and a psychological and a spiritual need to do this kind of stuff, because this experience requires communication, and communication is inevitable for this experience. You wouldn't be having this experience without communication. Yeah? And I can get really pedantic and get into the semantics of what do you mean by communication, what is communication, all that kind of stuff. But on the very basics, the ultimate base level of energetic activity in this experience that we call reality, what is it that's actually going on? It's communication of energy, exchange of charge from one to another. Yeah, and back and forth and back and forth, symbiotic exchange of information, of energy charge, of positive or negative or whatever else is going on at that kind of subatomic level. And I would argue that that is what goes on at the macro level as well. It's just that as you expand the fractal further and further out to more and more iterations and layers, each of those layers for us, I took from my own point of view, for me, each of those layers becomes more complex. Every time there's another iteration to another layer, it becomes more complex, inevitably, because it's fractal and it follows like the golden spiral. It follows the Fibonacci sequence of every time it's adding more to it, adds a third every time. There's a third expansion, the power of 3, which is something else as well. But that complexity means that there are layers of communication that are going on that we are in general either ignorant to or unaware of, because we consider them to be natural functions. We pay them no mind. We don't take notice of them because we don't need to. Yeah. Think of it from the point of view of your body and the way your body talks to itself. So the communication between your cells that is going on, the communication between your organs and your spinal column and your brain and all the other bits and bobs that are happening to enable your body to be what it is and for you to have this experience of what we call life in this reality. I would argue that there is then further layers to that. Yeah, there are higher iterations of that fractal where the communication doesn't stop. It just goes into other more complex ways that we communicate that most people may not be aware of. So think about things like body language, as I've just referenced body, so it's easy to talk about body language and how body language is another form of language. That's why it's called body language, because I'm probably doing it now. I'm probably doing facial expressions. I know I'm moving my hands about. I'm gesticulating to a certain degree, and even things down to like whole body movements and twitches and micro emotions and all. It's a further layer of communication. And I would argue that occurs on a psychological level as well, where if you're in communication with somebody, you would not only be taking the spoken word language that they are presenting to you, you would be taking in all these other cues as well, which is the body language, the micro emotions, the pheromone output, the smell, basically. It's the easiest way to describe pheromones. Yeah, it's a smell, kind of. It's more than that, but it's a way to simplify it. And I would argue that there's further to that as well. There's energetic communication going on. There's biological communication going on that may not come under the kind of remit of something that would normally be labeled pheromones. It's more going on there than just a smell. And as in a cliched phrase, you know, the chemistry of love, when people talk about when they get together in a couple and they talk about, oh, we have chemistry, or somebody will look at their relationship and go, oh, you two have got real chemistry going on there. And that is a subtle understanding or a subtle comprehension of something that is actually taking place, but is dismissed through a simplification to be something that we cannot comprehend. So they just say, oh, it's chemistry. Can't explain it. It's just chemistry. We just seem to get on. We seem to gel with each other. It's communication on a level that we find it difficult to track or comprehend or measure or quantify. Doesn't mean it's not happening. Yeah, as a classic, again, a simple caveat. Just to reach back for the caveat cue. There's a lot of stuff that I will talk about that cannot necessarily be put into a scientific description, can't be quantified, can't be weighed and measured. And there is a classic argument that just because you can't measure it, it doesn't mean it's not there, but just because in the same manner, it doesn't mean it is there either. There is a gap, a massive gap of knowledge and perception and the ability to measure using scientific techniques, such that there is this void of unknowns and possibilities that we cannot yet figure out how to even look at, let alone quantify and put down into scientific terminology and analysis. So I'll often talk about stuff that can't be proven one way or the other. Doesn't mean it does necessarily exist, but it also doesn't mean it does not exist. It's just potentials, concepts, possibilities that you never know. We may eventually figure out ways to weigh and measure these things so that we can calculate them. Back to the communication stuff. A lot of this environment, you come into this environment, you come looking for information for a lot of people. That's why they come to these kind of topics and they end up listening to some bearded guy talking about stuff on the YouTubes. They're looking for information, and I'm generalizing a little bit in terms of the demographics. Of over the years, I've found that this is generally true. The largest demographic are usually people looking for information so that they can figure out solutions to solve problems that they perceive, either problems that they have themselves directly, i.e. something's happening in their life, or they've had some kind of experience, trauma, maybe traumatic experience with the establishment, and they're looking for ways to solve that problem or to alleviate the suffering that it creates, or to escape from it, or to fix it in some way. Or they've seen that kind, from a compassionate, empathic point of view, they've seen that kind of stuff happening with other people. So to sort of, in a survival instinct quite a kind of way, to preempt that situation happening to them, they're coming looking for information and solutions of how to deal with these problems, because they don't want to suffer it themselves. And I'm sure you can all think of kind of classic examples and situations like that to do with all the stuff that's going on in the world at the moment. Nobody wants to end up in a FEMA camp. Nobody wants to thrown in jail because you're talking about political stuff that your government doesn't like you talking about. You don't want to end up getting injected with some kind of so-called flu shot, mandatory flu shots, because they tell you that you're supposed to have one, even though you don't feel ill in any way whatsoever. But I could make up loads of examples. But in this environment, I feel it's supposed to be about communication. It's an opportunity for us, not just YouTube, the internet in general. It's an opportunity for us to be communicating about loads of stuff, everything. And some parts of the internet, some parts of YouTube will be for certain stuff, certain styles, certain content, certain topics, and others will be for other. And there should be a disparate range. You should have an almost infinite range of any topic that interests you. Or even if you've never thought of it before, but you see it down on a recommended side list. Well, that's the way it used to be back in the day. Now it's more corrupted with the adjusted algorithms that affect what they want you to look at. And that's where I get back to the soul Excaliber and the problems in this environment, and a lot of what I've seen going on over the last few years, and absolutely ramped up to mega degrees, certainly over this last year, to the point where there has been a lot of this kind of fracturing effect, and people being spun off in loads of different directions, or being quelled and pushed back into the system because they've been beaten down, or they've been browbeaten, or they've just been exhausted by trying to deal in this environment, which is in many ways deliberately set up to saturate you in that fashion. Communication is absolutely the key. And I'm saying I would argue. I was just thinking, I've been saying that a lot. I'll have to try and think of a different phrase or another way to say it. I would suggest that it is the ultimate base level of everything. Communication is the beginning of everything. Because without communication, there would be no exchange. There would be no separate molecules. There would be no individuals arguing about who's right and who's wrong, and what fucking jacket you should wear, whether it should be leather or denim or whatever. The communication, exchange of charge, exchange of information. And the soul Excaliber thing was uniting that male and feminine energy to create a balanced environment where you have the wholeness of the feminine. So you can talk about anything and everything, but you have the delineation and the acuity of the masculine energy to really burrow down into any one particular topic that you might choose. And again, I know I'm talking in an idealistic fashion about that exchange of information, that communication environment, because as you've seen, and like I've just been talking about, this environment is not really that idealistic situation. It's not like you are going to a utopian library where everything is laid on for you. Yes, here you go. Here's the information you were looking for. Oh, you want to talk about that now? Here you go. Here's what you're looking for. It doesn't work that way, because there is that disparate variation of different people's points of view and different bodies of information and different concepts and ideas on this, not singular, multiple, plural, on these many concepts and ideas and problems and solutions. I was just thinking I could digress into a whole ramble about politics and the bullshit to do with the current political theatre. And now the the news I saw earlier on, just while I was setting everything up, about now the anti-Islam and the nationalistic racism and hatred in the UK was all the fault of Cameron. David Cameron is now to blame for all the rampant nationalism across the UK. So you see, sometimes these political straw men make very good scapegoats. You can use them like a scarecrow to project all your problems at, to throw all your negativity at, to invest all your dark energy into. And I would suggest that they've done that deliberately. That's all part of the sham of politics. Give you a straw man figure, one that you're supposed to like, one that's everything you ever dreamed of, and then the other one who's the evil, nasty guy, and you end up with that perfect dualistic, dialectic situation of the dark and the light, the good and the bad, and support one team or support the other. It's a lot more nuanced in contemporary political environments where they may not necessarily be so obviously good and bad. They're presented as being the best choice every time. But sorry, distracting myself. Yes, Kat, I distracted myself. So the Sol Excaliber thing, I'm going to carry on doing these shows. I might do similar to like I've done with this one. I'll put a sort of subtitle. I'm going to stick to calling the show Sol Excaliber, but I might put subtitles now and again. I put just on this first one because, as I said right now, the start, it's just me, just talking, just about, just everything. And the connections into justice via the would it be right to say literary symbology? Because I'm using the words in a way that I mean them to have, or I intend them to have multiple layers of meaning. It's just not just the English or Latin language definition of each word. It's also what the word represents and its symbolic value in that representation. Multiple layers. And justice could certainly be applied to the concept of both the sun in a spiritual or a theological fashion, a bringer of light. We would not be existing on this planet, certainly not the way we are anyway, in this concept of the human experience, without the sun, without soul. We would not be here. Then you could get into all the Gnostic, well, primarily the Gnostics, but not just them, but all the potential concepts to do with that original energy being projected to this area of space, part of the giant universe, where it coalesced into this thing that we call soul. And by that coalescing into what we call soul, it enables us to exist. So in effect, that original energy of everything is filtered through and concentrated by the sun. So the sun is the SON of the original energy from the creation of the universe. Hence, again, reference the astrotheology and how it's woven into Christian theology. And why I've often talked about the fact that the SUN is the SON. Yes, something else, because this is something that's been bubbling away on the internet for a while, and it connects into Christian theology and more to do with modern contemporary. Well, I said modern contemporary references back to a lot of the Reformational stuff as well. And I know, Kip's talked about the Reformation being sort of pushed back again in recent times, but these concepts that if you talk about something such as, like I've just described, that balance of the male and female energy, or of the big fiery ball in the sky actually being what they were talking about when they told you this story about the Son of God coming to earth to bring life, to bring the light to us all, etc. If you talk about this kind of stuff, then it's satanic and it's Luciferian. That again, that's a misdirection into a compartmentalized box, such that you can be dismissed or berated. That doesn't really get into the concept fully. It, like, I was thinking about it now, like Crowley did with the ancient law of do as thou wilt, but do no harm. And Crowley just came along with a scalpel, with his intent, his Excaliber of intention, and chopped that phrase in half and said, no, the new law will be just do as thou wilt. So he removed the bit that said do no harm, or he tried to convince people to remove that bit. That was his trickery, because he was just a trickster. But there's been a resurgence of that kind of, everything's satanic, the world's full of Satanists, it's being run by Satanists. And it's a simplification deliberately pushed to misdirect people and to misdirect them away from balance, partly. The primary reason is to push people into modes of thinking that are reactionary and extremist under current politically correct denominations, labeling systems. So now we not only have Islamic fundamentalists, we have Christian fundamentalists, we have Hindu fundamentalists, we even have Buddhist fundamentalists, which is just ridiculous, but it's there in the contemporary world. And this is why I say it does sort of link back to the Reformation at the time of the witch trials and the witch burnings and all this kind of stuff. And it's that give the general populace a simplistic version that can be easily demonized, so that then we can tell them who to hate, and they will happily and joyously grab up their pitchforks and drag people off to be burnt at the stake or hung from a tree. This kind of simplification it's entropic, it's not creative, it stunts people, it restricts their thinking, it subdues their creative life force by shutting them into a box. It'd be like getting a plant, like they do with a bonsai tree. It'd be like getting a plant and shutting it in a box so that you can stop its growth from getting any further. You only ever want it to be this shape. And they do that in a psychological fashion, in a spiritual, energetic fashion. And in recent times, that via the internet medium, because back in the day, it was there, but it was never to this kind of extent. Never. it was only from the advent of what is nowadays called social media, and the social media is dominated by some big corporate monopolies that are provably, if you bother to go and look into it and look for the evidence, manipulating what people see or hear or even read, if it's just text exchange or picture exchange or whatever. They are actively manipulating it to manipulate you, the viewer, the reader, the observer, to affect your perception of what is reality, and thereby affect how you think about your reality, and thereby affect how you interact with your reality. So as this kind of social media environment has grown, I've watched it. I've seen the rise of this kind of religious fundamentalism. I think the fairest way to say it is to say religious fundamentalism, because it's not restricted to one religion. It's nothing to do with any one religion or the other. They all end up subject to this because people can be, either by their own choices or stupidity or ignorance, or through the manipulation of others, be pushed to extreme points, extreme polarizations of concepts that are given to them by the theology that they choose to follow. In the Western world, here in the NATO allies world, because now the world has been divided east and west, and so that the Gog Magog can be set against each other to generate the phoenix, to create the environment, to create the rubble environment for the new Babylon to be built on top of. We've been told for the last several years about the Islamic fundamentalists, whereas the reality is there are fundamentalists in nearly all the religions, certainly the big five. There are fundamentalists in all of them. And those fundamentalists are pretty much all as bad as each other, because they all have the same attitude of either you convert to my religion or I'll kill you. That's the line, basically. And it might have some slightly different ways of how they go about it, but that's what it comes down to. And it is that stunting of communication between people, such that they isolate them. Sorry, coughing. I hope I didn't blow up your speakers. But that stunting or breaking off of communication, or usurping that communication, is where they can then isolate people into extreme points of view. It's Voltaire, a quote from Voltaire, I think it was him. If you can make people believe absurdities, you can make them commit atrocities. So if I can convince you that the guy who lives down the street is actually a demon in human skin, then you'll probably go and chop him up into little pieces willingly, because you think he's a demon in human skin. If I can convince you of something absurd, you're more likely to go along with agreeing to commit some kind of atrocity. And then you think of that application applied to the situation of modern extremists, because again, this kind of thing is nothing new. It's just a problem that has been deliberately used in this contemporary manner to create this situation yet again, where there are people who will chop the heads off children because those children are not of the same religion as them. And that is in no way sanity. It is in no way sanity. What else was I thinking of talking about tonight? Communication, exchange of charge. Misdirections and misinterpretations, and unrealistic expectations. This is something that I have talked about before on other hangouts in different ways, in pretty much the same way as well as I'm going to sort of talk about it now, but maybe I've got the opportunity to sort of ramble around it a bit more now. I know I did this, so I'm not trying to claim I'm I've never tried to claim I'm perfect. I've never tried to claim that I don't, that I'm free of all hypocrisies and stuff like that. But we're all on a learning process. And that is something that the current status quo, the current establishment system, the current system of the hierarchical authority engenders into all of us from the youngest age these concepts and principles of deference to authority. And I guess, a lot of people watching this or listening to this will be aware of things like the Ash conformity experiment and the Milgram experiments and things like that, psychological, scientific proof of how people can do crazy things because they're going along with some unspoken layer of group conformity or psychological acceptance that they may not necessarily comprehend or be conscious of, and they may not even agree to consciously, but they still do it anyway because they feel some kind of deep-seated compulsion that they need to go along with this. And in that manner, there is a misconception, I feel, that is fueled, it's pushed and fueled and exacerbated by the status quo because it enables argumentation. It creates and enables argumentation when people come to this environment expecting to find an authority figure that can give them all the answers. So when they start to realize that the politician on the TV is telling them blatant lies and they turn away because they've had that realization of this guy's just an arsehole, he's just lying, he's an abuser and a murderer, he's a war criminal, I can't listen to him anymore. So instead of turning to themselves or their closest family members, their closest friends, instead they turn and look for another authority figure. They look for the next person in a suit, or they look for the next person in a white coat with a clipboard, like the Milgram experiment, stuff like that. So when they come to this environment, they have that same expectation of the people they encounter here. So somebody will, I'm speaking partly from personal experience, but also from observation of watching this kind of stuff taking place on this internet environment. Certainly the what is called social media environment, where people are considered to be authority figures because they have a certain number of followers on their channel, or they get a certain number of thumbs up or likes on something that they put out there. Therefore, they're an authority figure. So people come with that same expectation of, well, you know what you're talking about then, don't you? I'll just sit back and let you put the information in my head for me. I don't have to think. I don't have to consider it. I don't have to even contemplate the possibility that you could be wrong or that you are trying to manipulate me in just the same way as that lying politician was trying to manipulate me. No, you are now my new chosen authority figure to feed me. And that combined with the efforts being made to deliberately misdirect and deceive people creates a problem where we have this mass of people all trying to come together and look for information to help them alleviate the problems and the suffering that they see around them or that they themselves are experiencing. And instead, all they get is all this argumentation of people that are supposed to be in the know, guru worship, or even, and that in and of itself is a misdirection. In a traditional sense, a guru should be somebody who's helping you to be the best of yourself. not somebody who just tells you what to do. And by telling you what to do, I don't just mean says, "Oh, you go and sit over there," but there's somebody that is telling you how to think, telling you what to think, telling you what reality is. That is not a guru. A guru is somebody that helps you find those realizations for yourself, helps you discover yourself, helps you discover your reality. Like a guy over my shoulder. But in this environment, in this modern age, since the rise of the New Age church, certainly, I'm pointing over the wrong shoulder. He's over that shoulder, is he? Yeah, he's over that shoulder. Sorry, Bruce. But the rise of that, I was just thinking, it is again similar to kind of like the Counter-Reformation stuff, the rise of the New Age church and the narcissistic nihilism that it generates in people. But the misdirection of, well, they no longer believe in us as authority figures, so as the classic situation of, well, you know, the best way to deal with the opposition is to control it yourself. We will give them a new authority figure to believe in, but he'll be somebody that seems like he's outside the establishment. He's anti-establishment even. I'm thinking of like David Icke and other such well-known names. And in that misdirection, people succumb to the same problem yet again. If they haven't really escaped the system, they're still in the paddock, they're still in the sheep pen, they're just listening to a different sheepdog. They haven't shaken off or lifted the wool from their eyes. They're just listening to a different sheepdog now instead. But a genuine guru is not about being a sheepdog. It's about helping people realize themselves and figuring this stuff out for themselves in their own time, from their own perspective, from their own points of view. Because even though there are objective truths in reality, there is also a hell of a lot of subjectivity. It's relative to your experience, your environment, your life, your family, your personal point of view. The very concept of that guru and how it has over the years become almost an ironic caricature of itself, of its concept, of its own conceptual existence, is that the system is quite happy to propagate this concept of the guru is somebody that you go and listen to and they tell you everything about life. And they tell you what reality is and they tell you how to live. And they just preach at you and you just copy what they say and everything they do, and that will allow you to be enlightened like the guru. And therein you see how that is just a carbon copy of the very establishment that people claim they want to get away from. They're just replacing it with a carbon copy of that hierarchical authority figure system. It's just it's got a different set of clothes on and it might talk with a bit of an accent. Yeah, but it's the same system. So the establishment has propagated that concept. A lot of the New Age church, you know, it's a loose label. And I think people who do get into that kind of stuff quite heavily would probably be, or would have difficulty with it being called a New Age church. It's based on that kind of concept. It's based on those kind of ideas. You know, oh, if they're looking for an opposition, well, as long as we control that opposition and it doesn't actually change the fundamental principles of how they think and how they live their lives, then let them believe in flying spaghetti monsters if they want to. As long as they're still paying their taxes, As long as they still put one brick on top of another in the Babylonian walls, then we don't care what colour religion they believe in. The establishment system is nothing to do with any one religion. It's not satanic. It's not run by Satanists. Again, it's a simplification to keep people distracted and running around in lower layers of complexity where they're still within the mirror maze. They can't face dealing with the simple concept that some people have the knowledge and ability and position to manipulate your environment to such a degree that they can make you have these absurd concepts that there are little demons poking you in the head to make you be an evil person. I will caveat myself at this point to say that I am not an atheist. Even in the literary definition of the word atheism, I'm not an atheist. I think there is a sentience behind what all this is. But I don't adhere to any of the religions or their theological reductions of what that is, or the anthropomorphizations of what that is, of saying, like, for example, God is a guy who sits on a cloud and has a big white beard. It's bullshit simplifications. And even at the higher theological levels, it's still the same thing. It's obfuscation. It's smoke and mirrors. Argumentation for no reason. No furtherance, no progression, just argumentation. One of the classic ones for me, and I've often talked about it, is evolution. And a number of years ago, it started to click in my head for me that, well, why have we got this egotistical attitude that God would not be capable of creating a system that utilizes or enables or emanates what we call evolution? It's a linear progression of development. You're telling me that this supreme being that can do everything, can create everything, can be everywhere and blah, 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 is not capable of coming up with ways of doing this? Why not? You mean God had to make everything all at once in the way that we see it now, just because that was written down in a book that you were told to read and you were told to obey? Makes no sense to me. And there's loads and loads of layers to stuff like that. And it's not, I'm not trying to pick on just one theology, just one religion like Christianity. It applies to all of them. The closest I get to any of the religions, even though it claims to not be a religion, is Buddhism. It is a religion, even though it claims it's not. In the same way that science has become another religion, because it suffers from the same dogma and the same magical thinking that they complain about, that Richard Dawkins likes to rant about. Ask Richard Dawkins where the universe came from, and he'll say something along the lines of, oh, don't ask me, go and talk to the philosophy department. It came from nowhere. It just started. Excuse me, isn't that the same as exactly what the religious people say? That all of a sudden it was just turned on, created. So aren't you having the same magical thought process that you're complaining about that the other guys have? Okay. But it gets into a lot of silliness when you start digging into it like that. My point was, with mentioning this, was talking about that misunderstanding and some of the deliberate misdirections that are pushed into the general public consciousness, that when people do start to question what is going on around them and why shit is happening and why is the world this way and all these problems and blah, 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 these are some of the misunderstandings and misdirections that are in your way when you start down the pathway. They are the magazine shelves in the gift shop that you nearly bump into as you're trying to get to the exit, because they're so determined. Oh no, buy this pamphlet, you know, buy these photos of the fun fair that you've just been in. Don't leave. They want you to stay within that kind of paradigm of thinking, that mental structure, that energetic structure that they have been hammering into your head since the youngest age they possibly could. Really, you're talking almost from birth. As is, from a UK point of view, I think it's probably true in a lot of the different countries now, that most children now grow up with a screen in front of them. It might be a television screen, or it might be a handheld gadget, whatever, but they are subjected to screens from the earliest age. And via those screens, they are projected imagery and sounds and music, whatever, you know, but they are given perceptions of how the world operates, and the foundational concepts, the foundational bricks that build their mind come primarily from those screens. There's some that come from family interaction. Sorry. Now I got the frog. The Illuminati have got into my throat. They're trying to stop me talking. Or use my power to get rid of them. There you go. That was Hillary, that was trying to give me that frog that she had. Was it Pepe the Frog? Is that what Hillary coughed up? Did Hillary cough up Pepe the Frog? That's a confusing and nicely comedic tangent. So I distracted myself then thinking about Hillary coughing up Pepe the Frog. Misdirection concepts, foundational stuff put into children's heads, but not ignoring the reality that a lot of psychologically and energetically, spiritually foundational stuff comes from a child's environment, its parents, its family life, the home it grows up in, etc., etc. But in modern day, compared to 100 years ago, obviously there was no screens 100 years ago. There was other forms of propaganda, but there was no screens. But now, so many children are subjected to this simplification, this simplified programming screen, from which, unbeknownst, I think, to a lot of parents may just be ignorant to it or unaware of it, or they shrugged their shoulders thinking, well, that's that's just the way it is. I turned out all right, didn't I? You know, I got a job. I like going down the pub and having a drink, so it must be okay. Yeah. But this is how the system is reinforced. This is how this paradigm is reinforced, because from that point on, as this foundation is built upon, it's reinforced again and again and again and again. You think of the educational system teaching people to defer to authority without question, and how it becomes more about repetition than actual thought process within themselves. Children very quickly learn to just repeat, to just say what is expected, because that way they get good grades and they get ahead and they get on with people. You know, you got to get on to get along. You got to get along to get on. Just say what is required. It's a sociopathic structure, but it reinforces that hierarchical paradigm that we experiencing at the moment. But that misdirection is not just, I'm trying to think of ways of expressing this to get past the surface layers, the simplifications of, oh, you know, that guy's a shill because he's telling you this, that, and the other, but then he tells you that the world is an illusion, as a misdirection. Yeah, telling people that everything is an illusion is a misdirection, because even though it can be semantically argued that matter is a perceptive quality, it's not a what we would normally define as a physical quality. It's a quality of perception, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. And when you tell somebody something is an illusion, they get the idea that that means it doesn't exist, that it's like a phantasm, like smoke. They could just put their hands through it. That's a simplified misdirection. But what I'm talking about is more the subtle misaligning of those foundational blocks of how people think, that therefore enables this crooked house to be built on top of it. Because from crooked foundations comes a crooked house. And trying to get past that in this environment ends up with a situation where, I feel anyway, and it's what I've experienced over the last few years, it's like 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Because we're constantly hitting this problem of some of the stuff to do with the problems in the world is now pretty obvious to most people. A lot of it has been deliberately as part of the agenda. A lot of it has been normalized to the extent that people just shrug it off and say, well, oh, what can you do? It's the way it is these days. But when they come then looking for information of how to solve these problems or to escape the suffering caused by these problems, they're still stuck in these paradigms of thinking that because they're at a foundational level, they struggle, they constantly beat their head against the wall with dissonance because they cannot conceive beyond that foundational wall or those crooked foundations that have been given to them. So I feel I end up a lot of the time in a situation where, like I've been doing earlier, I have to caveat myself a lot. Because if I just completely flow, and this is something that I used to do, like on the old shows, and I was doing the virtual shamanizing show, and some of that I'd do what would, by some people, be called channeling, but I wasn't channeling because I wasn't trying to channel some other entity. I was just speaking without filter. So I was trying to pull my egoic masks so far back or so far out the way that my thought process could just flow without being filtered through layers of fear to make me change what I was saying. But I found from some of the reactions I would get and some of the problems that emerged in those communications was that people would trip over something that I'd said or a concept that I'd shared. You know, and be like, oh, why are you saying that? That can't be true. You're wrong. You're a shill. You're crazy. You're a loony. And so, okay, yeah. Well, how did you get to that? You know, where did you jump to that conclusion from? But most of it, I've found, comes back to these misconceptions, these foundational misdirections that are put into people's heads from an early age and then built upon to such an extent that they become like the subsurface foundations. They're the kind of foundations that are under the house. You don't see them in general. Most people aren't even aware they're there. Psychologically, people would talk about the subconscious, and you know, you could get into looking at stuff like that and Freudian ideas and other ideas of where this stuff rises up from, base drives and the monkey brain and the lizard brain and all that kind of stuff. But I would hope that for most people, they get to the point where they can realize that your whole mind is there if you want to make use of it. Your whole energetic brain, and I say energetic brain because I'm not just talking about the squishy stuff that's in your cranium. Yeah, more evidence has built up over the years to show that there's neural cells within the heart, and there's most likely similar sort of neural interaction in the gut as well. So in a similar fashion of people will often talk about mind, body and spirit, you should also think about gut, heart and mind. Gut, heart and brain is what creates, or enables, I should say, rather than create, enables the acuity, the Excaliber of thought process that we comprehend as conscious thought processes. There's a lot more going on in the sub-level there. There's all the other stuff going on that we're not consciously aware of, but it's there. It's happening in the background. Those subliminal cues that my conscious monologue is not telling me, like, oh, his eyebrow just went up 2 millimeters on the left, therefore he's feeling a little bit quizzical. It doesn't. It's just there in my subconscious. I can access that information if I choose to by focusing on, oh, what's his body language? What's his micro emotions doing at the moment? Oh, yeah, look, eyebrow going up. Oh, right, yeah, okay. But most of the time, you're not aware of that. It's just part of the general communication that you experience. In that way, in terms of this environment, misdirections and misunderstandings can be a common problem, and I think are a common stumbling block for a lot of people. And I'll caveat myself yet again of saying I ain't perfect. I trip over this stuff all the time. But I'm quite happy to say I'm still learning. I make mistakes. I get things wrong, but I'm still learning. And it's that misconception of, I've been sat here talking now for what, 90 minutes, hour and a half, you know, and I can see there's people in the chat room, so I'm fairly confident people are listening and they're looking at the screen probably and watching me flailing in my hands about and whatever. But there is this misconception that just because I'm on a screen, I'm a talking head on a screen, does that mean I'm some kind of authority figure? Where do you get that from? Why do you need that authority figure? Have you just been taught to need that authority figure? There are situations where something like that is useful. Yes. It can be life-saving. Yes. Deferring to somebody who has more knowledge and skill than you in a situation where that would be beneficial and potentially even life-saving, yeah, that makes perfect common sense. That's survival instinct. But to do that all the time with everything about your life, to do that with things that are foundational to your life, to your health, to your happiness, to your children's life, health and happiness and environment that they live in. Yeah. To give these people on the screen, just because they're wearing a suit and standing behind a podium, to give them carte blanche to order the death of tens of thousands of people just so that they can keep the tax bracket at a certain level. Sort of obtusely referencing the austerity measures that have led to the deaths of probably knocking on 20,000 people now in the UK. I'm guesstimating based on the numbers that were released a few years ago. What was it, 2012, 2013, they put the numbers out at about 11,000. So if there was 11,000 back then, I think it's probably gone up a few thousand since then. But my point really, other than, referencing that kind of political situation, is that deference to somebody just because you've been taught that you have to give deference. When you see a uniform, you have to give deference. There's no question. There's no, oh, you should assess your personal situation and gauge whether it is actually in your benefit to give deference to that person because they have more knowledge and skill at you than you in that situation, therefore might save your life. No, you just have to see symbol and obey. See symbol and obey. Symbol of uniform. Symbols aren't necessarily just a squiggly line or a picture or something like that. Symbols can be much more contextual. From that point, what else was it I wanted to mention? Oh, brain farted now, so I'll just ramble for a minute while I think about it. Thank you for listening. I can see there's loads of chat going on the chat, guys. Sorry, I thought I might not be able to keep on with it. I've never really been very good at concentrating on multiple conversations at once, because when the chats are going well, you do get like multiple conversations going on in those chats. People are willing to join in, or even if you're just reading what other people are posting and talking about, it isn't necessarily all one conversation. There'll be multiple conversations going on, because as people do, they like to communicate, because communication is the key. And when there are lots of chatting going on, I'm trying to scroll all the way down to the bottom, I find it difficult to keep track of multiple conversations, because I like to actually pay attention. I'm not one of those people who turns my brain off waiting for my turn to speak. I've encountered that quite a lot. You get that quite a lot in this environment with some of the well-known talking heads have that kind of attitude. You see them waiting for their turn to speak, and they get almost like that glassy-eyed expression of like, I'm not really listening to you, I'm just waiting for you to stop speaking so I can start speaking. Whereas I like to actually, pay attention to what people are saying and what their words they're using and the inflection and intention, and that then nicely reminds me of what else I wanted to mention: intention, and talking about the mass mind and the manipulation of the mass mind. I was rambling earlier around the concept of that layers of fractal complexity, and how communication, I've said this many times before, communication is not just verbal. It's not just spoken words. It's a lot more than that. There's a lot more layers to it, and that's before you even get into things like pictures and photographs. Picture can tell 1,000 words. Intonation, inflection can tell 1,000 more, because you can say the same word in two different ways and it can have completely different effects. I could walk up to a woman and say fuck, and she might get the idea that I'm feeling a bit sexy, I'm feeling a bit horny, I'm sort of trying it on, in a really terribly awful chat up line. Or I could go up to her and I could say fuck in her face, and she might think, why is this guy so angry? What's he going to do? Is he going to attack me? Just different inflection, different intonation in the word. Still the same word, but it's got two completely different implied meanings in that situation. But in those layers of complexity, I've spoken many times about the kind of concepts of the global consciousness, the mass mind. Some theories call it the global consciousness. Other theory, different theories like the Gaia theory talk about us as part of the mind of Gaia within the biosphere, the surface biosphere that we experience and live within. We're like the charge, the electric charge crackling around, altering the surface of the planet as we go. So we're like the thought processes altering the garden of your mind, to put it in a kind of poetic way. But that mass mind concept also links into things like the psychological ideas, terminology of groupthink, the group mind, and that also links into esoteric and occult concepts to do with the creation of and manipulation of and harnessing of the group mind, the group energy, using a group of people to create and emanate an energy source that is not just from one of them, it's from a group of them. And think of things like a congregation of people all praying the same prayer or repeating the same mantra, the same chant, and multiply that then by thousands and thousands and thousands. Think of the experience that can be dependent on the situation and the emotional investment, but experiences such as being at a big football game where there's lots and lots of fans all chanting the same chant as they're, spurring on their team and hoping that their team is going to get closer and closer to the goal, and the chant builds up and you feel this energy rise. And that's that creation of the mass mind, the group mind, the energy of the group mind. This is one of those topics, by the way, that is, suffers from a lack of scientific quantification in the modern scientific requirements, but that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. There's a hell of a lot of ancient history to all these kind of concepts that in modern times have been given new terminology, but they're basically talking about the same kind of ideas. The guru thing that I mentioned earlier links into cult mentality, and a cult mentality is basically the same thing. It's an esoteric principle of getting people to adhere to a group mind project where they sublimate themselves to be lesser than the group mind, so they're subservient to the created group mind. I've just seen it, the hive mind, as ridiculous a days. Cheers. The hive mind is put in the chat. Yeah, that creation of that group mind entity. I use the word loosely, entity, just to express that it is something separate to each individual, not that it's a being unto itself, but that group mind entity is then considered to have more authority and more power than the individuals within that cult. And I'm only using cult as a way of giving the example, because if you can see that kind of concept as I'm trying to describe it, that concept can be applied to many different situations, not just what we're classically taught of things like cult and cult mentality and the groupthink kind of concept. Think of all the people that would be at a political rally, all waving the same banners, colorized and geometrically stylized symbolisms on a little flag, while all chanting the same mantra for their chosen political speaker that they support. It's the same thing going on. You're getting a bunch of people to all invest their energy, their emotional energy, and their thinking, their acuity onto this one concept, this one idea, this one ideal that is commonly in these situations personified. Yeah, there's that English language connection again. Personified as the person who stood up on the stage or behind the podium. And that is that injection into that group mind concept. Now take that further and apply it to all those children sat in front of screens, and how you could have 100,000 children across the nation all singing along to one song, all singing along to one tune on a kids' TV program. all agreeing with one particular talking head, cult of personality, narcissistic celebrity figure here on YouTube. And I think of some of the big name people that just churn out absolute, just the worst kind of effluent into this medium, and kids tune in their hundreds of thousands, and they'll all be repeating the same phrases that these idiocracy personality figures are chanting at them. That is a manipulation of the mass mind. And if you create that manipulation based on the foundational misconceptions that I was talking about earlier, then you can generate quite a malformed, energetic thing. And when you talk about fear out there and fear being used to drive the herd, I think I might have mentioned this a while ago, a concept that I thought about trying to put into a video at some point. I might still get round to it because it's somewhat of a difficult concept for me to encapsulate in a way that I feel I'd be able to create a video on it. But the idea of terraforming, the word or the definition terraforming, we've been indoctrinated to accept that word as meaning the changing of our natural physical environment to the way we want. So we'd go to Mars and we'll terraform Mars to make it inhabitable for human life. But I think terraforming is more about utilizing fear, terror, to drive the herd to build the Babylon that you want. You want to sit on top of a big pyramid with everybody staring up at you, then you just terrorize them in such a way that they all get together and pile up those stones for you until you're sat on top of the pyramid. You terraform the world physically through manipulating the mass mind intention of all those people. And links me back into talking about intention and intention magic and the soul Excaliber. I will wind it up in a bit, folks, because you have been subjected to my rambling for nearly a couple of hours now, and I don't want to overdo it and wear you all out. I don't want to fuel my own ego too much. Yes, intention magic. Intention magic again comes back to that altering reality with your will alone. Now, the misdirection, a common misdirection and misunderstanding of this kind of stuff is that you think chocolate cake and you get chocolate cake. Bing! Chocolate cake. Yeah, like the crap called the Secret, where they try and tell people, all you have to do is think like, oh yeah, there's a Ferrari in my garage, and if you do it every day, eventually there'll be a Ferrari in your garage, like magic. It's like, no, but without being too dismissive, to surface layer of comprehension, to simplification, to sell to the masses, to market to the masses, which in and of itself is an ironic example of intention magic, because the person that wrote that book and that put together that simplification knew full well what they were doing. In the same way as David Icke knows full well what he's doing, whenever he keeps telling people, he's like, oh no, this book I've written this time, this book will change the world. 1995. Yeah, I've written a book that tells you how all of the monetary system is bullshit, but I want you to give me money for it. Crowley's trick of, I can tell you the ultimate secret of how to trick people. Oh, yeah, can you, mate? Can you tell me? Oh, it'll cost you £2,000. Okay, here's your £2,000. Thanks very much. That's how you trick people. Bye. That is the intention magic. It's not, I think something, therefore it appears. It is, I convince you of this thing that I think, and you will create it for me. I co-opt your energy. I co-opt your thought processes. I co-opt your body. I convince you that it's a good idea, and you do it willingly. So if I sit here and I think, oh, I really like a chocolate cake, chocolate cake, and I keep mentioning it, chocolate cake, chocolate cake, chocolate cake, then eventually you're going to turn and go, do you want a chocolate cake? Yeah, I bought this chocolate cake. I don't know why. I was in the supermarket and I saw it on the shelf and I was thinking, didn't he mention he wanted chocolate? I'll get him a chocolate cake. Here you go, chocolate cake. And I am simplifying it a bit just to make it a little bit comedic and be a bit sarcastic about it, but to try and example that how the simplifications and misunderstandings like that are woven into so much that we are taught and indoctrinated and have reinforced on a regular basis via the cultural media that we are subjected to, that when you start down this pathway, when people start looking at these kind of questions, even if they're still in the political paradigm where they're looking at problems in the world that they feel are created by the political circus, the political theatre, and they start looking for alternative answers and solutions and whatever, they're working their way trying to get past these stumbling blocks, because a lot of these stumbling blocks are there to keep you confined within the gift shop still, to try and convince you to, well, you want a different authority figure? Here you go, listen to this authority figure. I mean, one of the other things I wanted to mention, which is something I know I've been sort of having a go at Ike and other, I might have mentioned one or two other big names, I can't remember now, the last couple of hours. It's too long, I've said other stuff since then, I don't remember. But this again, I find to be somewhat of a misconception, where, and you commonly encounter it as people are pushed towards polarizations. You're given these concepts and these attitudes that, because there are some problems with the person or the information that they're presenting to you, you should then automatically discount everything else from that person or within that body of information. And that does nothing but stunt yourself. And that is another example of that intention magic manipulation of the mass mind, that they have persuaded the vast majority of people that this is a right and healthy attitude to have. So when they encounter somebody who may be saying a few things that they agree with, but they then say other stuff that they don't agree with, they're just like, oh, you said that. Well, that's it. Well, nothing to do with you anymore. Go away. You're horrible. You're evil. You're a Nazi. And it's just dismiss everything because they've done something or said something that you disagree with. And being realistic, just to caveat myself, being pragmatic and realistic, that doesn't mean that you should give credence to people who talk absolute gibberish or that are, how to put it, nasty people. Think of whatever dictator. Like I've often used quotes that come out of the National Socialist regime, either from Hitler himself or Goebbels. I've used Goebbels quotes before and stuff like that. Doesn't mean I think they're good people. It doesn't mean that I want to go and learn everything about them and be just like them. But there is that concept, that the ad hominem concept of, well, it doesn't matter if the statement is good. Look at the person. Oh, the person's horrible, therefore you must ignore the statement. There was, I can't remember what video it was under, ages ago, somebody put up a video and I just left a little quick comment underneath. I think I said thank you for the video kind of thing, like I often do. I'll often just post a thank you under videos, stuff like that. But I put a quote from Einstein, one of his classic quotes that I like using because I think it helps people that get stuck in the empirical, materialistic compartmentalization of the academic system. Imagination is more important than knowledge. And what I feel Einstein was trying to get across to people was exactly that. You know, don't restrict yourself to a box of known knowledge, because if you're only ever in that box of known knowledge, you'll never be able to develop any new ideas. New theories, new concepts of how the universe works, of what reality is, come from imagination. They come from speculation, from the human ability to externalize and existentialize into alternate environments, alternate timelines, alternate futures where we can plan, which is what a theory is. It's a plan of linked hypotheses of how something works so that you can predict the end result. And if your plan is correct, then the end result that you observe in experimentation equals your theory, your prediction. And that's what he was trying to say, I feel. But somebody, probably a sock account, I can't even remember the name of the account, had posted a reply to my comment saying, "He's a Jew." I just looked at it and I just replied ad hominem. I didn't even bother trying to explain it to whoever this person was that posted that comment. So, what does it matter if he's a Jew? Take the value of the statement itself. Does it make reasoned, logical sense to you? Does the concept expressed in the statement add up? If it does, then it doesn't matter who said it. But there again is that concept of people or misdirection, that we are indoctrinated to not necessarily or hardly ever look at the information itself, to look at the statement itself. Instead, we have to look at the person. And if there's any one single thing that we've been taught is naughty or to be disliked about that person, then not only them, but their statement as well is thrown out of the window. And that enables the establishment to control information, to character assassinate people, to shut down certain concepts or topics, because they don't have to argue the point of the logic or the reason within the statement itself. They just attack the person. And for a lot of people out there, they have been trained to be emotionally reactive in such a way that they just go along with it because they see an authority figure shouting. So they think, oh, authority figure is shouting, therefore I need to get riled up and start attacking what they're shouting at. And that has been very, very much fueled and enabled and pushed into this environment that I call it social media, because the internet is nothing like it was 10 years ago, let alone in the 90s when I first started getting into this kind of stuff. It doesn't operate in the same way. It's a much more controlled and segregated environment now. So I think I've rambled quite a lot. I've talked about a lot of things, hopefully. Now, I'm not sure if this video is going to remain available on the channel, since they've done some of the recent updates and changes with Google Plus and the way the Hangouts work and stuff like that. Hopefully it will remain there on the channel. If it doesn't, then you were lucky to hear it while it was live. But hopefully it will stay there. I will carry on doing this kind of series, where it will more likely primarily just be me talking, because this is my opportunity to talk about whatever topics I want in whatever way I want, without having to worry about sticking to a certain topic or not rambling or not digressing like I often do, and linking in other context as I often like to do. But I might as well in the future have people on to chat with, or even, do it where there's multiple of us in here like we do with the other hangouts, and have a group chat and stuff like that. And I'll see how things go. I'm going to be doing it on a hopefully regular basis. I'll try and stick to the Sunday night thing for now. I might even franchise it, spur some other shows now and again, dependent on how things are going. But yeah, I will be talking about this kind of stuff in general. Maybe I'll get a bit more into other particular topics, or topics in particular. Basically what I'm trying to say is, yeah, I'll be back and I'll be talking again. I'll be rambling again. Hopefully without fueling too much of my own ego. I thank you for being here and listening and giving your time to listen to me and consider what I'm talking about and rambling about. Don't take it as any kind of authority and absolute truth. Go and think about it for yourself and discard the bits that you don't think are right. And the main thing is, don't stop moving. That was why I was going on about the Ike thing, wasn't it? Yeah. Don't get stuck in any particular paradigm. There's a lot of people out there with a hell of a lot of good information, and there's quite a lot of the big names who have some good information, but there's misdirection in there as well. Some of it may be deliberate, some of it may be through ignorance, lack of knowledge, awareness, shilling, trying to sell you a product, whatever. There could be loads of various reasons, but it doesn't mean you just disregard everything. You got to keep moving. Don't get stuck in any one particular place and think that anyone has all the answers. Nobody has all the answers. If anybody tells you they have all the answers, they're either deluded, mentally unstable, or they're trying to trick you in some manner, most likely to try and sell you some product or bullshit, pyramid scheme or whatever. Buy my book. I might eventually buy a book. I was going to say I might eventually put a book together. I was thinking of doing a book that just has on the cover, buy my book, and then inside it just has one page that's blank. I was somewhat inspired by an old movie that was supposed to star Bruce as the lead role, called The Silent Flute, and it ended up with David Carradine starring in the role, I remember. But the trickery in that was he was searching for a book of enlightenment, and when he finally got to see it, I know I'm giving away a spoiler here, but it's a really old cheesy film, if you can be asked to seek it out and sit and watch it. But in the end, he finds his way to this book, and when he opens it up, inside it's just a mirror. Yeah. And it's as simple as that. That was something that I did mean to get into. Maybe I'll just throw this in quickly before I wind up. Reflection. And I was talking about earlier about the communication is the key. Hello. Hi, Jeff. I just seen you comment in the bottom there. You're on the Supreme Lord Commander channel. But yeah, it's Jeff C. Hello, mate. Hope you're doing all right. Reflection. Yes, sorry. Talking about the mirror. And if you look into things like the Tao Te Ching and the concept of the two mirrors, the reflection, and the reason I meant to talk about this earlier was to do with the pushing of the idea that everything's satanic, everything's an inversion, or everything's run by Satanists who are trying to do evil, etc. And in many ways, it's true. There are a lot of very crazy people, or evil people, nasty people, psychopathic people that do things for their own evil intentions, whatever they are. But this reality, this experience, has a lot about it that can be described or talked about in the concept of the mirror, the reflection. What you experience is a reflection. What you put out comes back to you. The simplification that is called the secret is based on that reflection. Those principles that what you put out comes back. If you put a lot of energy out into the world, then energy will come back to you. That doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get the kind of things that would be classically called success. So the expectation that if you do lots of good deeds, you're going to get loads of money and flashy cars and shit like is a complete misconception to what it actually means. The reflection brings you back what is really truly valuable in this experience. And a lot of the time it's what you need. And that value and those things that you need are not physical, financial gain. It's not stuff. It's not materialism. It's not consumerism stuff. This is why, if you look back across all the different religions, look at all the different major figures that have been important in terms of helping people with their spiritual awareness, their energetic awareness, even just living life, being joyful and happy. They're most commonly people who don't have a lot of materialistic financial wealth. The majority of them end up living lives of not necessarily of austerity, some do, but some live modest, humble lives. The majority of them lead quite humble existences, yet they have a wealth that cannot be quantified. Now, again, another example of the misdirection of people's energy. Success does not equal a pile of gold. You can't take it with you. You can't spend it on the other side. So amassing all this stuff is not really helping your true self. All you're doing is piling up stuff like a dragon's hoard. I'm sorry, Kat. Yes, I know I've been ranting a lot. I'll shut up now. Okay. Thanks, folks, again for listening. Hello to everybody in the chat room. James and Stewie and Ridiculizer. And Jeff under his Supreme Lord Commander account, and Nemi Freaks, Stewie 628, hello. And I know there was loads of other people in that probably drifted off as I've been rambling, sorry. Christy Griff, hello mate. Stoneman, Tony the artist formerly known as non-violent extremist. Sorry, you're making me cough with your non-violent extremism. And I'm scrolling back up. I can't see any other names at the moment. Sorry if I've missed you. It's not deliberate. It's just there's a lot of chat to scroll through there. I will sit and have a read through and try and catch up with what people have been talking about. Thanks again for listening. I will do this again next Sunday, and I'll probably be ranting at you, talking at you again on Wednesday night, more than likely, if not before then. So thanks a lot for listening again, folks. Don't forget, don't believe all the hype. Don't fall for everything you see, and don't stop looking. Don't stop moving, and don't stop being excellent to each other at every opportunity you get. Random acts of kindness can change the world radically. Right, enough rambling. Sorry, folks. Thanks again. Good night. Good night. Good night. Oh, I've got to find the button to push now. Where is it? Too many screens open. There you go. Good night, folks.